Okay, we're going to start the panel discussion, and I would like to introduce Leslie Matthews, who is going to be our moderator for the evening. Leslie is a retired attorney, and many of you who are local probably know her from all the work that she has done with KHEN. She's really worked a lot in that area. And Leslie has also moderated some film festival discussions, as well as some candidate forums here for us. So I'll turn it over to Leslie. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's great to see you out there. I'm really excited. And by the way, just a little more. As I said, I'm a retired attorney and business consultant. And I've lived full-time here in Salida since 2015 with my husband, Ken, and my dog, Buddy. So that's me. I'll be your moderator this evening, and what I'd like to do right now is introduce our amazing panel. We have a wonderful variety of local individuals with expertise and experience that should make our discussion very interesting and informative. So I'm very excited about this conversation. And so, panel members, when I'm going to give a little introduction for each of you, and if you would just raise your hand so people know it's you, okay? All right, thank you so much. All right, let's go. Let's start with Kelsey McNeil of Solvista Health. This is Kelsey. Kelsey is a licensed professional counselor and program supervisor at Solvista Health right here in Chaffee County. She has worked with youth and their families for 15 years, both from school systems all the way to youth detention centers. Kelsey lives in Salida with her partner, 2 daughters, and what she self-describes as way too many pets. Welcome to the panel. Thank you for being here, Kelsey. Next, I want to introduce Dr. Libby Stout. I believe that's the correct pronunciation? Yes? Stout? Okay, great. Thank you. Dr. Stout is a board-certified addiction psychiatrist. She has worked in the addiction and behavior health field since 1990. She was the medical director for the Circle program in Pueblo, Colorado, which is a 90-day inpatient treatment program for those with co-occurring, so at the same time, both mental illness and substance abuse. And those persons in the program are people who have failed other levels of treatment. Dr. Stout retired from clinical practice just this past April of 2021 and continues to engage in education and trainings from her new home base here in Salida. So we want to welcome Dr. Stout and also welcome to our Salida community. Glad to have you join us. Thank you. Next, I want to introduce Michelle, is it Pujol? Is that the correct pronunciation, Michelle? And Michelle is our social media specialist this evening. So she has an MBA in international management and more than 25 years experience in digital marketing. Michelle has worked up and down the East Coast as well as in Colorado, helping companies ranging from startups and small businesses all the way to multinational corporations. Michelle works with companies to optimize their online presence, including website development, advertisement, and most importantly for tonight, developing social media campaigns. So welcome, Michelle. Very interested to hear your opinions on all of this tonight. We're also glad to have been able to include 2 students on our panel, which I think is extremely relevant and exciting. The first is Stella Vizzi. So if you raise your hand, there's Stella down there. She's a sophomore at Salida High School. She's 15 years old and a member of the Salida High School Knowledge Bowl, the drama team, and the vice president of the Extraordinary Teen Council. So clearly Stella is very engaged in her school community, and we're greatly appreciative to have a young person as part of our discussion this evening. Welcome, Stella, and thank you for being here. And last but certainly not least is Callie Banghart is also joining us from Salida High School. Kelly is a sophomore as well, and she is part of a nonprofit group called Elevate Her. I'm sure if you're a local, you've heard of Elevate Her. She's very engaged in that endeavor. She's also on the Teen Youth Council and enjoys outdoor activity and is very passionate about running and rock climbing. So, welcome, Callie. So that's our panel. Pretty great, huh? Diverse. I'm very excited. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everyone that's put this panel together, because I think everyone on the committee did a great job. So if everyone's ready, okay, we're going to begin. And we'll start. I have 3 questions that are relatively general questions, and then we'll also go to the cards that people have passed in. So thank you for that. So let's start with your initial reaction to the film. So the question is, what surprised you the most? What surprised you the least? And do you feel the film's concerns are valid? So why don't we just start at this end of the table with Kelsey, and we'll just go down the row. Thank you.
Sure. I would say what surprised me the most is how uncomfortable it is to sit with this information and think about, I have 2 young kids myself, and also treat a lot of youth in our community and work with a team of mental health professionals who treat a lot of youth in our community. And so it becomes a really big question about how do we address this? How do we change this? And as much as us therapists like to sit in uncomfortable places, it's not that fun to be thinking about that.
Thank you. Okay, Michelle?
So I watched this film last year when it came out, and while there was...
Yeah, we probably need to move that.
Sorry about that. I watched this film when it came out last year, and I rewatched it again so that I would be a little more familiar with it. But it is very uncomfortable, especially being in the industry, and thinking that we knew initially what it was being built for. So although it is a for-profit, and so you always worry about what direction for-profits are going to go when it's all about the money. Initially, there was a lot of good, and there still is a lot of good. I mean, my sister lives in Kenya, and one of the things that helped save them last time there were elections and not having the violence that they'd had the year before was social media, because social media could get out to the villages, and they could get to the local, police to kind of quell things before, things got out of control. So I've seen a lot of good come of it, but sitting, what was one of the most uncomfortable things is watching all these very senior people and people that helped build it be so concerned. Okay, so that was, I think, one of the big things. And then, I'm sorry, I have my notes here because my printer didn't work. So I wasn't planning on using my phone, but, so having all these people in the industry sound the alarm was probably one of the most surprising things. I think it's one of the most important ones, too. And then what surprised me the least would be, I think, and it was my naivete as well as many others, is that anybody would expect a for-profit company that's growing into a multi-billion-dollar industry to want to regulate themselves. For years, I have been saying that there needs to be regulation, and it was already behind the 8 ball. And there's a lot of people have been saying that, and frankly, it's everyone's fault, but Congress has not taken this seriously. Partly because they don't understand it, which I understand the concern there, but that's been one of the things that surprised me the least, was that you expect them to actually regulate themselves.
Great, thank you so much. Little microphone adjustment there. Dr. Stout?
Yeah, I had a similar thing. The thing that surprised me the most, that there were such erudite young people speaking out about this. And I was gratified for that, because on the other hand, I have not been surprised about this at all because of the addiction potential. And this is no different than any other industry that profits off of people's addiction. And this is, I mean, it truly is an addiction. I thought the greatest quote in here was the one that said, "The only industries that call the consumers users are the drug industry and the social media." And so it just made me think about a time when I was running the program I was running in Pueblo. It was a 90-day inpatient program, and we actually had money for young people, and this is an effort to get more medical students interested in going into addiction psychiatry. So they could come and spend a month as a patient, and they get paid to do that, and we got paid to take them, and they got educated in it. It was a great experience for them. And the thing that they had the biggest trouble with was, I mean, they didn't have addiction problems, but for a whole month, they couldn't use any social media, no access to their email, no nothing like that. And it was quite an experience for them, and for us as well. So this was many years ago where I could see that this was a very serious problem that was only going to get worse.
Great, thank you so much. Stella, what are your thoughts initially? Surprised?
Well, I really enjoyed this film because growing up with social media, I've seen my fair share of, oh, social media is such a terrible thing, documentaries, and I really enjoyed this one because you get to see an insider opinion from these whistleblowers that know the inner workings of their systems and know how these ideas came about and like the fundamental, I don't know, just the basis of all social media, which was really fun to hear from more of like a scientific perspective, which I really enjoyed about it. I wasn't surprised about how it was affecting teens. I wasn't surprised about addiction, and I really wasn't surprised about how much they monitor our information. It's something that my generation knows about and jokes about a lot, which is kind of not good, you know, how we've become desensitized to like all of this madness that is social media. But what I did find surprising was just how concerned, and I think other people have said this, how concerned the people that made it were. And that was just kind of very eye-opening to me, is like these people that did leave these companies.
Thanks, Stella. And Callie, what are your thoughts?
My initial reaction to the film was definitely how other people have said, is just how unsettling it was to have to think about, is that us, or at least me and Stella's generation, has definitely grown up with this. This is our lives. You can name 90% of people in Salida High School have social media. And I think that's just honestly the most like prevalent part of that, is just that everyone knows about this, but yet the people that created it are so shocked of what's kind of become. And then I would say for the most surprising was honestly the fact that I wasn't surprised. With everything they were saying about data taking and everything, I was, to the point of Stella was saying, of desensitization, I was like, oh, yeah, I figured. Like, there wasn't a moment of, oh my God, like, why am I present in this? Why am I a part of this? It was just almost you accept that risk when you're joining, and I feel like that's not widely known.
If you would, just tell me a little bit more about what you see in high school today. I'm just curious. Is everyone on their phone during school? I just want to know kind of how it really is in high school these days.
So I could also chime in on this, but I think this is really funny. So I actually got Instagram for the first time ever on Sunday. And I think it's really, honestly, eye-opening, because when I was working at school before I had it, it was, you would see a bunch of people, they wouldn't necessarily, in class, I mean, people would be on it, but it wasn't as like, I never had the epiphany of like, why is this so like important to people? And I think that a bunch of kids, it's such a wide spectrum. For some kids, it's like, I have it, but I'm never on it. It's just there for the communication aspect. But then for some people, definitely in my grade at least, there are people that spend every waking second on Instagram, on Snapchat, and you can't get away from it.
And I'll also say something that maybe people that aren't in high school will not know about this, is growing up with social media actually makes you a lot more socially awkward, I think. So you'll see people like walking down and I've been guilty of this too in the past, like walking down the hallways, just swiping on your home screen because you don't want to make eye contact with people, or it affects how you socialize with everyone, and it affects like kind of just the core of like how we communicate, because like everyone at school has kind of lost the ability to have like important conversations without like face to face. Like there needs to be that buffer of a phone, and I don't know, that's like things that I think people don't really realize unless you're in it and you see it all the time. So.
I would also agree to Stella's point is that it is definitely almost a crutch. I know I'm also guilty of it, is if I'm like in an awkward situation or I don't want to talk or something and someone's like asking me a question, I'll like say something really fast and then like look down at my phone and pretend like I have something, or if I'm like feeling like awkward and everyone's doing something and I'm not, like I've definitely more than once like just been like scrolling through a random like my camera roll because I don't want to talk to people, or I don't like, I feel almost excluded, if that makes sense.
That's profound.
Wow, that is extremely profound. We just looked at the ground. Anyway, one last question before we move on. Again, super curious. So when you're in a classroom at school, do people have their phones on their desk like they depicted in the
Yes.
movie?
Every day.
All the time.
100%.
Constantly.
That's really interesting. Okay. All right. Before we move on to question 2, I want to go over just a few facts that may or may not have been mentioned in the movie, just to get our juices rolling here, okay? So this is going to take about 2 minutes or so. So in 2019, the Pew Research Center completed a study where they found that 1/3 of American adults, that's 1/3 of all American adults, and nearly half of those 18 to 29 were online, quote, almost constantly. And in February of 2017, the American Journal of Epidemiology reported on a 5,000-person study which found that higher social media use correlated with self-reported declines in mental health, physical health, and life satisfaction. Then, very recently, I'm sure probably people have heard, that in September of this year, the Wall Street Journal reported that Frances Hogan, who is a Facebook whistleblower, turned over thousands of internal Facebook documents to both the Wall Street Journal and the US government. Included in those materials is evidence that Facebook conducted their own research into Instagram's effect on teens. According to this internal Facebook research, 1 in 3 teens said that Instagram made his or her body image issues worse, and Facebook did nothing to address those data points. In 2019, the New York Times reported that the number of countries with political disinformation campaigns on social media doubled in just over 2 years. The Wall Street Journal also reported in 2020 that an internal Facebook report stated that 64%, let's see if we can really kind of get this, 64% of people joining extremist groups on Facebook did so because their algorithms steered them there. Another internal Facebook report that the Wall Street Journal reported on in 2020, this internal memo to Facebook senior executives read in part, "Our algorithms exploit the human brain's attraction to divisiveness. If left unchecked, they will feed users more and more divisive content in an effort to gain user attention and increase time on the platform." So speaking directly to the human's brain's attraction to divisiveness, which I think is an interesting point. I'm looking over at, Dr. Anyway. And lastly, on October 5th, Facebook whistleblower Frances Hogan, a former Facebook program manager and a member of Facebook's civil integrity team. So they had it's been disbanded, by the way, but they did have a civil integrity team, She testified to the U.S. Senate Committee under Whistleblower Protections. And I want to give you a quote from her testimony, and this is after she presented evidence to the committee. She then summarized by saying this, quote, "Facebook harms children, sows division, and undermines democracy in pursuit of breakneck growth and astronomical profits." Astronomical profits. And lastly, as we heard in the film tonight, extraction technology, the collection of individuals' data, interests, and political affiliations to sell to advertisers has made internet companies the richest companies in the history of humanity. I thought that was profound in all of the history of all of humanity. So, with that said, I'd like to move on to question 2, which is, I'd like you to speak from your own unique perspective and tell us what consequences of social media use concern you the most and why. And we'll start with Kelsey again.
What stands out to me is the lack of connection on so many levels. We know that connection is the foundation for wellness. Lack of connection leads to addiction, leads to mental illness, and other difficulties in life. And so there are lots of layers of this disconnection that we see in my day-to-day work providing mental health services for youth. You know, the way that people present themselves on social media and how that influences how we feel, right? We hear all the time, people don't tend to put their bad days or their bad pictures on social media, right? They're putting their best days and their most beautiful pictures. And that gives this sense of everybody's doing better than I am. People, you know, my peers and my friends and other schoolmates are more beautiful than I am. So that's the one layer of the disconnection. And then I appreciate what our student panelists said about the social awkwardness and just that we're attached to our devices so much that we also lose a sense of connection in our ability to just interact. And yeah, hallways are awkward in high school no matter what. But actually using the device as a way to avoid even awkward connection. And then, you know, in the film, they really spoke about the polarization and how those algorithms pull us in these different directions. And I think never before have I felt such disconnection, you know, in our culture. And I think that's incredibly harmful for all of us, and especially for our youth.
Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you. Michelle, your social media perspective on all of this.
So I look at it from two different sides, right? From the business perspective of, you know, I'm in the business of helping businesses grow, however that may be. And when I first started, it was using print, it was using TV. And one of the reasons that I was attracted to the online, and this was way back when it was first starting, was that you could analyze all the numbers. I mean, if you do advertising on print, and unless you have a specific code, you have an idea of how many people are seeing your ad because of their circulation numbers, but you don't really know how effective that ad is being. And with online, you can track things. And so being able to tell the business, well, you've spent this much money, and this is how many people have seen your ad, and this is how many people have clicked, and this is how many people have actually bought your product or whatever, gives them more tools to make better decisions for their business. Okay, so from a perspective of a business, that was always sort of the idea of behind whether it's social media, if it's Google ads, or if it's other websites and advertising. What's happened, and what's really happened over the past maybe, 10 years of social media and of Google, is that the artificial intelligence has become smarter and smarter, and there's less human interaction. So there's less people at Facebook, less people at Google that are making decisions. The computers are making the decisions. So from a business perspective, which is, not as emotional as the personal perspective. My concern is that the AIs are making decisions that are not necessarily for the good of that business. They're for the good of Google, and when you're talking about advertising. They're for the good of Facebook. So you as a business are spending this money, but you don't have as much control over where your ads are being seen. Now, supposedly they're being seen by more people that might be interested in your product. So supposedly they're going to be more efficient, but again, Google and Facebook are making those decisions on their behalf, not on behalf of the business. So that's my concern more from the business. Now, from just my personal concerns is that as those AIs have become more and more intelligent and learned, and humans have sort of lost somewhat control of them, and they have certain goals that are not necessarily all of our goals, the fake news, the disinformation, the brainwashing of people through extremism, as we saw that's a huge concern of mine, and I've seen it just get exponentially worse every year. The other one is what you have talked about and what the students talked about, which is I worked for many years for multinational companies, and as I had younger and younger students or people work for me, they couldn't have conversations. We would have a meeting that was very open and have them, everybody could talk, didn't matter, small meetings, not very big things, and they wouldn't speak, but then an hour later they'd text me an incredible idea, but they couldn't bring it up in the meeting. So it wasn't even an uncomfortable conversation. It was something where they could talk about what their ideas were, and they couldn't do it. And that was already 10, 15 years ago. I was starting to see that happen. And it wasn't just the introverts. It was even the extroverts. It was even the people that were very confident. And that started to really concern me because what do you do in business? Well, you have to negotiate. You have to compromise. You have to come up with ideas and then not nix some of those ideas. So that was one of my biggest concerns, is that I'm seeing the students and the young people today, and even our generation, the more you use your phones and the more you use your computers, the less you're communicating in person with people. So.
Those are incredibly interesting points. That's the first I've heard anyone communicate that Facebook or Google or whatever the internet company is, they're really, yes, they're getting advertising dollars, but the algorithms are designed to keep you on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
That's the number one thing they're designed for, is to keep you on Facebook, which gives them a better ability to sell advertising, but maybe not so much exactly what the advertiser wants, which is really interesting. And secondly, the idea of communication skills, kind of going the way of cursive writing, right? So, yeah, great, thank you so much. Dr. Stout, your thoughts?
Yeah, my biggest concern is this effect on the learning and memory part of the brain, because addiction destroys it. And of course, not everybody using social media is addicted to it. But this film did a really good job of demonstrating some pretty severe addiction. The young lady who broke the box to get into it, and the young man who tried to quit and couldn't. And so basically, that's the problem, because once you have, and they're using these algorithms on purpose, so they know that, and he said, intermittent enforcement is the most powerful way to get behavior to change. And so you don't get something every single time, and that's why you have to keep looking at your phone, because you're not sure you're gonna get it right now. But the more you get it intermittently, the more reinforcing it is. And so then you're hooked. And they do that on purpose. Like those 3 guys running that machine, that was really scary to think that that even exists. I think that's fabulous.
Well, they represent the algorithm.
But then what happens is, so this dopamine surge is happening up and down all the time. And then as the psychiatrist on there said, you get this dopamine deficiency syndrome, where actually that's what that young man was experiencing for 3 days of not using his device. And he was extremely depressed. And when you're in that state, you cannot learn anything new. And in fact, your hippocampus is shrunk. You can't put new information and learning into that part of your brain. And so this is my biggest concern, that we're going to create a whole society that is having issues with learning and memory. And then the other really concerning thing I have that they pointed out was this, what do they call it, Snapchat dysmorphia. And so this, I think it's really telling that these increase in suicide attempts and self-harm have increased dramatically since 2009, according to that graph, when all of this really came out and being more used. So that's really concerning.
Wow, okay. It's disruptive to the human brain, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
On a chemical level, it's disruptive to the human brain.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, girls, what do you have to say?
All right, I have a few things to say. I'd like to start by saying that earlier it was said that social media breaks down self-confidence because we're always showing the positive sides of it. And I wanted to just briefly say that I think there's two sides to that coin, because I deleted my Snapchat like 3 weeks ago, I believe, but there is a very large problem with oversharing on social media, oversharing the bad things you're going through. The amount of stories I would see of people like crying on social media, like just, oh, I'm crying, I better take out my camera and record this. There's that good aspect, but there's also kind of this, you're bombarded by everyone's emotions and opinions and feelings all the time, which are simultaneously working against you in very different ways. So I wanted to just start by adding that to what you were saying. A few concerns I would say I have is the effects on young people, and also the effects on people in older generations, millennials, Generation X and older, which I think is slightly different, because in teens you see how it damages like self-confidence, it causes depression, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. What I've noticed in older generations, which nobody ever really talks about in movies and documentaries and things that I see, is what I've noticed is how the ability to multitask and the ability to engage when an older person is addicted to their phone goes way down, and it is difficult to get through to a person when they are addicted to their phone. That can be said across the board, but I've noticed it more with people in like millennials and Generation X. Really, it affects them too, and I think that's something we don't talk about a lot. So that's a, I don't know, concern that it brings up for me. Young people, I mean, I could go on all day, but we usually, I think everybody kind of knows the issues there with self-esteem and just overall brain problems. But yeah, I think something that isn't said a lot is like how it affects older generations.
Thank you, Stella. Kelly?
I would say, I think there's a lot of concerns to be addressed, to be completely honest, is to all of everyone on the panel's points, is how social media has really not only shaped, but like benefited and severely harmed everyone, no matter what your age, your gender, or anything. It has impacted you in one way or another, whether you have it and what you don't. And I think my biggest concern is going to see how me and Stella's generation, the generation that are digital natives, we were born into this, we have lived in this our whole lives, is always been a part of us. And I think it's really just going to be to see how we almost turn out in the end, because we essentially are the guinea pigs. No one knows what I'm going to come out as when I'm older because of the effects of social media and just our society and the pressures around it at such a young age. I know people that have social media and they are like 10. And it's just that aspect is just, if you are getting it at such a young age, what is your problems? Like, what is the, as it's been brought, body dysmorphia and all of that? added to your such a vulnerable age and how that's going to impact you as we grow in age.
Those are great points. Thank you, both of you. It's really so wonderful to have students here. You have no idea. For everyone in the audience, we're all like hanging on your words. So I want you to know that.
Good job.
I want to move on to question 3 real quick, and we're running out of time, but I don't want to miss, so I'm going to start with you two first, okay? I don't want to miss what your thoughts are. Specifically, we're now moving on to what can we do about this, right? And especially locally, because, you know, if anybody's ready to change Facebook, I mean, you know, great, that's awesome. But on a local level, what can we do? So my question to you is, inside of the school system, do you see anything that could make a difference in improving sort of the health and behavior of students vis-a-vis social media? What are your thoughts?
My biggest thing would be just education. We've always been taught that, like, social media is bad, you need to be careful, but no one's ever really gone into the adverse effects of it, and I think The Social Dilemma maybe did a really great job of doing that, but I think we need it more regularly. I think we truly need something to say, hey, we know we're not gonna get all of you to be like, we don't want social media, or we're not gonna be addicted. Like, you can't do that at our scale, but I think you could also offer tools and strategies and just basic education on what you're getting yourself into, because it's a larger scale production than what we've always been told and what we've been shown.
Great, thank you.
So, trying to think on how to word this. There's a lot to be said about this. I think Callie's point on education is very important, and that could be said for multiple things that revolve around teens. You can say that for drunk driving. You can say that for peer pressure, like all the assemblies we have about how to deal with the real world problems. Social media is just another one of those that needs to be added to the list of things teens need to be educated about but aren't. And with each of those problems is, how do you really get them to care? Very, very difficult thing to do. And it's something that I don't think anyone's really truly solved with any of those issues, to be completely honest. The thing that makes social media so much more difficult is that you can't just change a local culture when the culture is coming from a worldwide web of opinions and people. Like, to change a local culture that is affected by everything else around us is very, very difficult, I think. Something that my peers and I have been working on in a club I'm involved in is teen mental health. And I think when you first kind of asked that question just now, the thing that my mind went to is like, oh, like, what focus groups can we hold about this? And like, how can I, like, what friends do I need to talk to and what teachers do I need to interview to, like, get their opinions? And I think that's, like, where personally I would start with kind of battling how to regulate and teach teens how to regulate their social media and their screen time and the effects that are brought on from that screen time. I think getting personal opinions, having one-on-one conversations is extremely important. I think having school-wide conversations is extremely important. And overall school culture about the causes of social media that will it'll lead back to that original root cause conversation. And I think that's the way I would work it, is go from like, oh, you're having these mental health issues. Have you considered deleting your Instagram account? Like, I feel like there's a way to kind of get back to that root cause with teens that will make them appreciate that information more.
Yeah, thank you. I asked my millennial daughter this question, and I asked her specifically, from a baby boomer standpoint, one might think, well, just don't let them have phones in school. There you go. Just make them all leave their phones home, right? And my daughter, who's 36, by the way, not that young, right, said to me, that's just not realistic, Mom. And I just thought that was interesting, because that was my initial baby boomer, just take their phones away.
But it used to be realistic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it used to be realistic,
I
exactly.
remember when, depending on if you were government or you were in business or whatever, you had to leave your cell phone in your desk or at your office or in your car. In some buildings, you weren't allowed to bring it in. Schools, you had to leave in the locker, or, because for emergencies, you'd still have it. And so that's a question, is why are they allowed to have, if you're supposed to be in school to learn, right, okay, why are they allowed to have their phones right on the desk? That blows my mind. And again, I'm older and I'm not in that situation, but even my godkids who are millennials used to be able to have their phones, but had to be in their locker. They could only use them during their breaks, and what that would do is that would allow them to concentrate, at least in class. I don't know that it would solve some of the other issues that we're talking about, but.
Yeah, I just think it's an interesting conversation because it is very generational. I've got a 36-year-old that tells me that is unrealistic.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
one of the reasons that that's not apparent anymore, from what I've seen, is we use our phones academically a lot. We listen in Spanish. We are listening to Spanish podcasts on our phones that are plugged into our earbuds, and we're checking our email on our phones. And I do use my phone in class, and I'm doing educational stuff on there. That's like half of my phone, like, gigabyte is used up for like stuff like that. I think teachers have learned to like kind of incorporate that into like that's a resource to use. The problem with that is you're also going to be distracted on it.
So it's a very interesting conversation, to say the least. It is 8:30. I'd like to keep going for another 5 minutes if that works for our audience. Is that okay? Cheryl, where's Cheryl? Yes, it's okay. Okay, good. So I wanted to ask our other panelists really the same question. It doesn't have to be specific to schools, however. What do you see we could do locally, if anything, to make a difference with the concerns that were brought about in this film? What do you all have to say about that?
I would echo the education piece for youth in schools, but I would add families. I have a daughter who I'll say, get off your phone, and she'll say, well, get off yours. And it's like, I have to take responsibility for my behavior and how that influences my kids. The other thought that I had, and we've floated these kinds of thoughts for lots of issues here, is how to engage youth in different activities and make that accessible. So, I think Elevate Her is a great example of a youth activity resource that pulls kids away from screens. But a lot of times there's, financial barriers or transportation barriers to participate in a lot of the activities we have. And we're in the middle of nowhere, and so there's not a lot for youth to do. So that would be another thought I have about how to address it.
Great. Thank you very much, Kelsey. Dr. Stout, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I really like Stella's idea of getting the kids involved. And when I was wondering, is this a film that you could show at school? Would people be interested in seeing this film at school?
I watched the first 30 minutes in my advisory class once last year, but we never finished it.
I would also second that.
Because it is a long film. Yeah.
And to that point is we do, like Stella said, we have watched bits of it, but they're mostly just the important, let's scare our kids out of this part almost. They don't ever get, I know my advisory at least has always shown the snippets of this is super bad, but they don't ever go into the actual part. So I think if we were able to show the whole movie, it would be a whole different story.
And we're not stupid, so we're you're just trying to scare factor us. It's not gonna work. You have to really do the education part, which is hard.
Because I think it might be great to ask their input and I would love to see if people can volunteer to see what it's like to not do social media for like that kid did for a week, just to see what happens to them. How do they handle that? How do they survive? And I think it would be really interesting to get their input and get people to experience that. And I do think they had some good suggestions on this film because I do think it is true that most people in the industry don't allow their kids to do this. And so maybe more people seeing this film. I like the idea of not having, your kids not having it until they're 16. I wish teachers were less dependent on it. I think that's part of it. That is the excuse, absolutely. I've heard that over and over again. I have to have my phone because I have to have it for school. And I have to do all this stuff. And I don't know how you go back. Like, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Yeah.
Well, this is fascinating. Obviously, the panel feels strongly that education is a big issue that could be dealt with locally, perhaps in the schools, with families, and other places. A lot of the comments that came from the audience have to do with, the trouble being that we don't agree on what the truth is, and that existed before social media as well, with different news channels being very different, et cetera. But that with social media, it's become more individualistic almost. So it's in much to Dr. Stout's point that it starts to really affect your brain differently when you're addicted to it in that way. I can recall people being very concerned about television watching before, if you remember, those of us that are old enough to remember, that was the thing we were worried about. How many hours did you sit in front of a TV? And I know when I was a child, I spent hours every day sitting in front of a TV. Not good, but that is what I did. And so it just sounds like the people in the audience have an issue with, it's not like this is a new problem. It's just that this is a sort of exponential in size compared to perhaps what it was when it was television that was the problem.
Well, and if I could, not on the social media side, but on the Google side, which I personally separate the two, one of the things that one of the gentlemen, Jordan, said, which is true, which is making that exponentially worse, is that when you type something in, you could type something in and your neighbor next door could type something in, and based on your behaviors, your age, your location, et cetera, you could get something completely different back. So you're not getting an encyclopedia or a dictionary or even a listing of everything that you're asking for. You're getting something that AI, not a human, is choosing for you. And that's what's causing more of the divide as well. So it existed already before, but those tools are making it exponentially worse.
For sure.
And they're unregulated. I think that
That's-
was a really important point.
Yeah, and we can't change Facebook or Google on our own. But you can do. I mean, there has been change in the world on things that were very big, one by one, and that's by contacting your congressman, contacting your senator, telling them that this is one of the most important topics. You know what I mean? First at the state level, but really it has to be at the federal level, and that is something that, I mean, it's going to take a while, but they need to be regulated. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I can say as a law student back in the day, in the 80s, that we studied a lot about, antitrust regulation that went on in the 1920s, let's say, where they broke up, big corporations that were monopolies. So it's not that we've never addressed when things got out of hand. As a country, the United States has addressed these issues in the past. It's just that things are so fast now that we haven't caught up, and it's kind of gotten out of control before there's an opportunity really to understand. I think someone mentioned it on the panel. Most of the Congress people don't even understand what's going on. That's why it's so great to have these, people that really began everything speak about it. Yes, Doctor.
I just can't help but bring this up. There's a very strong corollary to this that's happening in Colorado right now, and that's with the marijuana industry. And so the marijuana industry took off like crazy horse and really put out these really high potency products without any regulation. And so we were able to get a bill passed this session by educating legislators about it and how dangerous it was, and family members testified against, how dangerous these things had been, how with their family members, their children with suicide and psychosis and all kinds of things. So that does happen, and it's just interesting that took off in 2009 as well. So that graph I was seeing for this mirrors the graph for marijuana and all the other problems that we've been seeing. So that's just a good example of how, yes, you can change. You can get the government involved, and they can start regulating things. but it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. I'm just going to read a couple of these real quick and just see if there are a few comments, and I think then we'll probably wrap it up. This person says, "Well, I agree with the major message, but the irony is that the film doesn't practice what it preaches. It seems to be promoting another conspiracy theory. Why not be more focused on solutions and less on the anxiety of it all?" So that was one of the comments. Another, which just was really interesting, was, "Other than prosecuting and convicting and jailing Mark Zuckerberg for crimes against humanity, I don't see any other outcome except civil war." So you can see that there are some real opinions
Well,
out there.
it's funny, one of the comments, one of the first things I did after re-watching this, and I didn't get a chance to finish, was go out to the Center for Humane Technology, because a lot of these people seem to be working for them, to find out what it is they are trying to do. Because I was also interested in, okay, so what are some of the, at a big picture, we know what the solutions are, but how do we start impacting that? And that would be something interesting, is to kind of follow and see if they're leading the way in trying, in addition to speaking to Congress and everything, what are they doing to try to help solve the problem?
Yeah.
Agreed, agreed. Thank goodness there is a Center for Humane Technology, that someone's actually speaking out is pretty wonderful. I could go on, but I think we've gone over time sufficiently. So I want to thank everyone that came tonight, and everyone that's on Zoom. Hi, and thank you for being here as well. And I especially want to thank our amazing panel. I think that we got into some depth of conversation that really was valuable, like extremely valuable. So thank you all for your time, your effort, and your willingness and your courageousness to come and speak out. So thank you very much for that. And I just wanted to see whether, Cheryl, you wanted to say anything to close? No? All right. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.